The soul is not a peaceful entity. It is a battlefield. Within every individual exists a war between powerful internal forces, and most people are completely unaware of the enemies they face inside their own minds. Lust, envy, pride, and jealousy are not just fleeting emotions. They are inner tyrants, each fighting for control over thoughts, actions, and identity. These forces whisper in the background, shaping decisions without permission, pushing individuals towards self-sabotage, resentment, and unchecked desires. To live without recognizing this battle is to be ruled by these unseen dictators. Carl Jung understood this well. He saw how unconscious desires and repressed emotions build up like an ungoverned kingdom, eventually manifesting as anxiety, depression, or destructive behavior. Most people assume their struggles are external, problems with their job, relationships, or society. But often, these are mere reflections of an internal war they refuse to acknowledge. Jung believed that true self-mastery begins with facing these inner tyrants head-on, identifying their presence, and gradually integrating them instead of letting them rule from the shadows. Think of a person consumed by jealousy. Instead of recognizing it as an inner force they must confront, they externalize it. They resent successful people, criticize others' achievements, and feel like victims of an unjust world. The same happens with pride, where individuals blind themselves to their own flaws to protect a fragile ego. These forces work together to keep people weak, reactive, and unconscious, preventing any true growth. Until someone learns to recognize and challenge these tyrants, they remain their prisoners. But what does it mean to challenge them? It starts with self-awareness and brutal honesty. Jung's concept of shadow work, where one deliberately explores their darkest thoughts, hidden motivations, and suppressed emotions. The goal is not to destroy these parts of oneself, but to integrate them, to channel envy into ambition, lust into creative energy, and pride into self-respect rather than arrogance. The alternative is a life dictated by unconscious impulses, where the individual remains a puppet controlled by unseen strings. Jung's own journey into self-discovery was a direct confrontation with these forces. His visions, emotional upheavals, and descent into the depths of his mind were not signs of madness, but a necessary war for self-mastery. The soul, when left unexplored, becomes a prison, but when confronted, it reveals its greatest gift, transformation and personal power. And no one knew this better than Jung himself. His battle with his own soul wasn't just theoretical. It was a real, visceral experience that shaped his entire philosophy. Chapter 1. Jung's personal struggles with his soul. Carl Jung's confrontation with his own soul was not a metaphor. It was a visceral, haunting, and transformative experience. At the height of his career, after breaking away from Freud's rigid psychoanalytic model, Jung began experiencing powerful visions and internal dialogues that forced him to question everything he thought he knew about the mind. His soul was no longer a passive presence in his life. It became a force of its own, speaking to him, pushing him into the depths of self-discovery and challenging the identity he had carefully built. This period of his life, documented in the Red Book, was not a simple intellectual exercise. It was a descent into the unconscious, where he encountered the raw, untamed forces of his own psyche. He began to see that the mind is not a single, unified entity, but a landscape filled with archetypal forces, instincts, and forgotten truths, each demanding recognition. The struggle was overwhelming. His rational mind fought against the chaos, but his soul insisted on breaking through the illusions of the ego. Jung's deep spirit, the voice of his soul, urged him to abandon societal expectations and the artificial structures that had shaped him. The academic world valued control, order, and intellect, but the soul operates on a different wavelength: imagination, passion, and confrontation with the unknown. He was torn between two worlds: the world of structured knowledge and the world of raw, intuitive wisdom. The battle was not just psychological, it was existential. Would he surrender to the expectations of society, or would he risk everything to embrace authenticity and inner truth? For Jung, the price of ignoring his soul was stagnation, intellectual arrogance, and spiritual decay. This is the price many pay when they choose comfort over self-discovery, security over truth, and social approval over the demands of the deeper self. His journey revealed something crucial. Until a person confronts the buried forces within, they will never truly know who they are. The rational mind alone is not enough. It must be balanced with the wild, instinctual, and often chaotic depths of the unconscious. Jung's struggle mirrors the battle many face today, the conflict between living by external rules and embracing the soul's inner rebellion. The modern world conditions people to suppress their deeper instincts, to conform, to be civilized at all costs. But Jung's journey proves that true self-discovery requires courage, the willingness to let go of false identities, and the acceptance of one's own darkness. And this leads to a bigger question. How does culture shape the way we experience our own soul? Because whether we realize it or not, the way we define our emotions, desires, and identity is largely influenced by the cultural narratives we inherit. Chapter 2. The Role of Culture in Shaping the Soul. Most people believe their emotions, desires, and struggles are purely personal, but the reality is far more complex. Culture programs how we interpret and experience our own soul. The stories we inherit, the myths we absorb, and the moral frameworks imposed upon us all shape how we understand our instincts, ambitions, and even our suffering. Culture is not just a backdrop to life. It is an active force that molds identity, sometimes in ways that disconnect individuals from their true nature. For example, in traditional religious cultures, desire is often framed as a force to be controlled or suppressed, while in hyperliberal societies, it is often encouraged to the point of indulgence, without deeper introspection. The same applies to ambition, aggression, or self-expression. Depending on the cultural context, these traits are either seen as virtues or as vices. But the raw forces of the soul remain the same. What changes is how people are conditioned to perceive them. The soul does not operate by cultural rules. It simply exists. Jung understood this deeply. He saw that Western civilization had created a system that glorified intellect but ignored the unconscious, repressed instincts, and feared passion. Modernity conditioned people to see their inner fire as something dangerous, something to be subdued, medicated, or rationalized away. But the cost of this repression is depression, existential emptiness, and a disconnection from one's own life force. A culture that teaches people to fear their own nature ultimately produces a society of individuals who lack vitality, creativity, and deep purpose. This is why understanding one's cultural conditioning is essential for self-liberation. Many people live with unquestioned beliefs, ideas about success, morality, love, and personal worth that are not truly their own. To reconnect with authentic selfhood, one must examine, what have I been taught to value? Which aspects of myself have I suppressed because they were deemed wrong by society? What cultural myths have shaped my identity without my conscious awareness? This level of self-inquiry is the first step in reclaiming ownership over one's soul. The Western world, in particular, is facing a crisis of identity. It has become increasingly disconnected from its spiritual traditions, symbolic understanding of life, and deeper existential meaning. Instead, it has embraced a worldview that reduces human existence to material success, intellectualism, and consumerist distraction. But this has led to a crisis, a generation disconnected from its instincts, its passion, and its deeper purpose. And this leads to a crucial realization. Western culture's current trajectory is not just flawed, it is fundamentally anti-life. Chapter 3. The Western Crisis and the Denial of Life. Western civilization, once built on a foundation of philosophy, myth, and spiritual depth, has drifted into a state of nihilism, disconnection, and self-destruction. The modern West has become a culture that denies life itself. It suppresses passion, sterilizes imagination, and conditions individuals to exist in a state of passive consumption rather than active creation. Instead of fostering self-mastery and personal transformation, it produces individuals who are mentally fragmented, emotionally numb, and spiritually empty. This crisis is most evident in the modern education system, which prioritizes intellectual conformity over creative thinking, obedience over independence, and memorization over self-discovery. Students are trained to be efficient workers, not awakened thinkers. Creativity is stifled, curiosity is discouraged, and genuine self-exploration is often labeled as irrational or impractical. The result? A society filled with individuals who are technically competent but existentially lost, highly educated but deeply unfulfilled. Jung warned about this long before it became obvious. He saw that when a culture disconnects from the deeper layers of the psyche, its myths, symbols, and spiritual traditions, it creates a psychological vacuum. This vacuum is then filled with materialism, consumerism, and shallow distractions that temporarily numb the emptiness but never truly satisfy. The soul craves meaning, purpose, and personal evolution, but modern Western society offers none of these. It offers cheap dopamine, surface-level pleasures, and endless entertainment designed to keep people sedated. The consequences are clear. A society that denies life will inevitably produce people who feel lifeless. The rise of depression, anxiety, addiction, and existential dread are not just individual struggles. They are symptoms of a civilization that has abandoned its spiritual core. Instead of encouraging people to embrace their instincts, channel their passions, and strive towards self-empowerment, modern culture keeps them in a state of psychological dependence, where they are always looking outward for validation, guidance, and meaning. But there is a way out. The solution is not in returning to blind tradition or embracing nihilism. It is in rebellion. Rebellion against the cultural forces that suppress authenticity, against the societal norms that weaken the soul, and against the system that discourages self-liberation. The West is in decline, but that does not mean individuals must decline with it. This is where the call to rebellion begins. The fight to reclaim vitality, creativity, and personal sovereignty. Chapter 4. The Need for Rebellion Against Modern Culture. Rebellion is not just about resisting authority. It is about reclaiming personal sovereignty in a world that conditions people to be weak, dependent, and conformist. Modern culture trains individuals to suppress their instincts, deny their passions, and follow lifeless routines that offer comfort but destroy vitality. True rebellion is not about blind rejection. It is about reconnecting with the deeper forces of the soul, breaking free from mental slavery, and forging an authentic path that aligns with personal truth rather than societal expectations. The most dangerous aspect of modern culture is that it pretends to encourage individuality while subtly enforcing conformity. People are told to express themselves, but only within acceptable ideological frameworks. They are told to follow their dreams, but only if those dreams align with economic productivity and social trends. The result is a generation of individuals who believe they are free while unknowingly reinforcing the same system that drains their vitality. Real rebellion starts when one sees through this illusion and decides to carve their own path. But rebellion is not just external, it is also internal. The inner tyrants, lust, envy, pride, fear, often act as the greatest enemies to self-liberation. Many people blame society, politics, or the system for their unhappiness. But the truth is that the battle for freedom begins within. A person who lacks self-discipline, mental clarity, and control over their emotions will never be truly free, no matter how much they fight external oppression. Jung understood that inner work is the foundation of real transformation, and those who avoid this work will always remain slaves to their own chaos. To break free, one must reignite their life force by embracing creativity, physical vitality, and intellectual independence. This means challenging every assumption, rejecting passive consumption, and engaging in real, tangible acts of creation. A person trapped in endless scrolling, mindless entertainment, and ideological dogma is not rebelling. They are submitting in the most subtle way possible. True rebellion requires rebuilding the self through physical strength, creative mastery, and intellectual self-education. The modern world will not encourage this kind of growth. It thrives on keeping people weak, unfocused, and in a constant state of distraction. That is why rebellion is not just an option, it is a necessity. But rebellion alone is not enough. It must be channeled into transformation. To escape the gravity of cultural programming, one must not only resist, but actively build a new foundation for self-mastery and personal evolution. And this leads to the most crucial aspect of the journey. Chapter 5. The importance of personal transformation and self-discovery. Rebellion is the spark, but transformation is the fire that sustains real change. Many who reject societal norms still find themselves lost, drifting without direction because they have not built an internal structure strong enough to replace what they abandoned. Walking away from the system is not enough. One must actively rebuild the self through a process of deep self-discovery, discipline, and personal mastery. Otherwise, rebellion turns into nihilism, and freedom becomes another form of enslavement. Jung understood this well. He saw that self-discovery was not about rejecting the past entirely, but about confronting it, integrating it, and choosing which aspects to keep and which to discard. This is why transformation requires brutal honesty, looking at the aspects of oneself that have been shaped by cultural conditioning and asking, is this truly me, or is this just a reflection of what I was told to be? Most people never ask this question, and so they remain trapped in a second-hand identity, built from external expectations rather than internal truth. Real transformation demands competence, not just philosophy. In a world that values intellectualism over real-world ability, many remain trapped in endless theory, debating ideas instead of applying them. But true self-mastery comes from developing tangible skills: physical, intellectual, creative, and emotional. This is why the great thinkers, warriors, and artists of history never relied solely on ideas. They tested their knowledge through action, discipline, and lived experience. Personal growth is not about collecting abstract wisdom. It is about embodying wisdom through direct engagement with reality. A major roadblock to transformation is the modern obsession with comfort. Western culture has conditioned people to fear difficulty, struggle, and the unknown. But growth does not happen in safe spaces. It happens in the trenches of effort, challenge, and self-confrontation. Jung's descent into the unconscious was terrifying, chaotic, and overwhelming, but it was also necessary. He understood that to become whole, one must face the darkness, extract its lessons, and return stronger. The alternative is stagnation, a life spent running from discomfort rather than growing through it. Personal transformation is not a luxury. It is a necessity for those who want to escape the mental, emotional, and existential decay of modernity. But transformation is not a solitary process. Throughout history, individuals seeking self-discovery have gathered in circles of learning, discussion, and discipline, pushing each other toward deeper understanding and greater achievement. And that leads to the next realization. If Western civilization is in decline, who will shape what comes next? Chapter 6. The Decline of Western Civilization. The West, once a cradle of philosophy, art, and intellectual greatness, is now spiraling into decay, stagnation, and self-destruction. What was once a civilization built on competence, discipline, and spiritual depth has been replaced by consumerism, nihilism, and a rejection of its own foundational values. This decline is not just political or economic. It is psychological, spiritual, and existential. A culture that loses its connection to truth, vitality, and purpose will inevitably collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. Jung foresaw this crisis. He understood that when a society abandons its myths, symbols, and spiritual traditions, it creates a deep existential void, one that cannot be filled with material wealth or technological progress. Western culture has become sterile, lifeless, and obsessed with rationalization, rejecting anything that does not fit into scientific materialism or ideological conformity. But a society that denies the soul inevitably produces individuals who are mentally fragmented, depressed, and devoid of higher purpose. The consequences are everywhere. Young men and women are lost, disconnected from any meaningful identity. The education system teaches obedience, not wisdom. Modern relationships are built on superficiality, not depth. People are encouraged to be passive consumers rather than active creators. Instead of pursuing personal mastery, they are conditioned to seek comfort, validation, and endless distraction. A civilization that fears struggle, rejects hardship, and discourages self-reliance is a civilization that has already surrendered to its own decline. But decline is not destiny. Even in the ruins of a collapsing empire, individuals can rise above the decay. The fall of Western civilization does not mean that those who recognize the problem must fall with it. History shows that when an era collapses, it is the rebels, the thinkers, and the self-empowered who shape what comes next. The choice is simple: become part of the decline, or be part of what will emerge from it. This is where personal action becomes essential. If the modern world no longer provides a path towards self-mastery, meaning, and strength, then it must be created outside the system. The question is no longer about whether Western civilization can be saved. It is about who will build what comes after it. And that is why the focus must shift to the creation of a new intellectual and cultural foundation. Chapter 7: Practical Solutions for Self-Transformation. Recognizing the crisis of modern culture is not enough. Action is required. Those who understand the decline of the West must not waste time complaining or waiting for change to happen externally. The only real solution is self-transformation, a process that involves breaking free from cultural conditioning, reclaiming personal power, and developing the skills necessary to thrive in an era of collapse. This is not just about survival. It is about creating a foundation for a new way of being that is resilient, independent, and aligned with higher principles. The first step is mental and physical discipline. A weak mind and a weak body will always be controlled by external forces. This means prioritizing intellectual self-education, physical training, and skill building over passive consumption. Read the books that challenge conventional thinking. Train your body to handle stress and discomfort. Learn practical skills that give you autonomy, whether in philosophy, art, business, or craftsmanship. The modern world conditions people to be mentally scattered, physically unfit, and dependent on external validation. To break free, one must reverse all of these trends. The second step is detoxifying from cultural manipulation. Society is engineered to keep individuals distracted, emotionally unstable, and spiritually numb. This is done through social media addiction, entertainment designed to weaken attention spans, and ideological narratives that instill guilt, confusion, and division. The solution is to reclaim focus, limit exposure to mindless content, engage in deep work, and create rather than consume. The more one separates from modern programming, the clearer the mind becomes, and the easier it is to build a life of purpose. The third step is creating a community of like-minded individuals. No one builds an empire alone. Throughout history, those who shaped civilizations, from the ancient philosophers to Renaissance thinkers, did so within circles of discipline, knowledge, and mutual growth. The lone individual can accomplish much, but a network of self-empowered individuals can shift the course of history. This is why forming intellectual groups, creative alliances, and communities based on shared values is crucial. The mainstream culture is built to weaken, but parallel structures can be built to strengthen and awaken. Ultimately, self-transformation is not just personal. It is a cultural rebellion. Every individual who breaks free, masters themselves, and builds something real is contributing to the foundation of a new era. The fall of modern civilization is inevitable, but what comes next depends on those who are willing to rise above the ruins and forge a new path. The question is not whether transformation is possible. The question is, who will have the discipline and courage to pursue it? Conclusion: the war for the soul. What will you do? Carl Jung fought the battle that most people run from, the war between the conscious mind and the forces buried deep in the unconscious. The Red Book is proof that ignoring this war doesn't make it disappear, it only makes you weaker. And that raises the question, are you willing to face what's inside you? Or will you continue letting unseen forces dictate your life? Every day, people are ruled by their inner tyrants: envy, fear, pride, self-doubt. They think their problems are external, but the real struggle is happening within. The Western world discourages this kind of introspection, instead offering distractions, passive ideologies, and artificial happiness. But the truth is clear: if you don't take control of your mind, something else will. So, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you go back to routine, unchanged? Or will you take the first step towards self-mastery? Will you continue to let cultural programming shape your thoughts? Or will you begin the process of breaking free? Jung's battle was personal, but his message is universal. The soul is real, and it demands to be confronted. Drop a comment below. What is the greatest struggle you've had with your own mind? Have you ever encountered an inner force that felt beyond your control? Let's discuss it. And if you want to continue exploring the deeper layers of psychology, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's much more to uncover, and this is only the beginning.